Hello everyone.
This reckless
Before
strategy
we begin today's
jeopardizes
video, I need your
everything
help.
we've built.
We've noticed that the channel is losing traction.
You can't just ignore
and
the
subscribing
board.
is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to the story.
You can't just shut
You
me
think
out.
this is love? Her mother's voice cracked through the glass walls like thunder in a quiet sky.
It's fine, I'll listen.
The boardroom froze. Even the air conditioner seemed to hold its breath. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. Not when her mother's eyes burned through her and every syllable carried a lifetime of entitlement. Across the table, her father leaned back, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the man standing beside her. Calm, still, unapologetic. David Carter. The man everyone in this room had underestimated. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to David. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. Just stood there, black suit, black tie, black skin against white marble. And somehow the contrast said everything. Emily's parents had built their empire on image. And David, simply by existing in this space, shattered it. Her father's tone cut sharper than the mother's. So this is the man you've been hiding? The man you think can sit at our table? David's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. I didn't come to sit. I came to stand beside her. That line landed like a challenge. Even Emily blinked. It wasn't defensive, and it was truth. Simple, unfolding, unapologetic. Her mother scoffed. You people always think defiance is dignity. The words floated, venomous and rehearsed. David looked at her for a long second, then said softly, maybe that's because dignity is all we've ever had to protect. Silence. A heavy, living silence, one that pressed against the glass and the marble echoing down the hallway. Emily reached for his hand under the table, her fingers trembling. He didn't look at her, didn't need to, just brushed his thumb once across her knuckles. A quiet reassurance that said, let them finish. We're not done here. Her father turned to the assistant near the door. Get security. He's leaving. The assistant hesitated. Everyone did. Because no one in that room could quite name the feeling crawling up their spines. Was it anger or fear? David's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He didn't check it. Instead, he looked Richard straight in the eyes and said calmly, you're about to make this personal. I'd suggest you don't. The line didn't roar. It whispered. But something in his tone made even the walls seem to step back. Emily's mother rose from her chair, voice trembling between control and chaos. You will not threaten my husband in his own office. David met her gaze. Then maybe you should ask whose name is actually on the door. And just like that, the room broke. A gasp, a shift, 1,000 assumptions cracking in silence, fade to black. The story had only just begun. The meeting ended, but no one left. The sound of footsteps faint against the marble was the only proof that time was still moving. Emily's father had stormed into his private office, slamming the door so hard the glass shivered. Her mother lingered, pretending to sort papers that didn't matter just to stay close enough to glare. David stood near the window, silent. The city glowed beneath him. Towers, lights, endless motion. The same world that had once told him no 1,000 times before it started saying, sir. Emily spoke first. You shouldn't have said that. He turned to her, voice calm. What, the truth? She shook her head, half afraid, half proud. You know how they are. You just gave them a reason to hate you louder. David's lips curved, not quite a smile. Then they'll need a louder room. Her heart twisted. He always said things like that, quiet, poetic, dangerous. Words that made sense to him because he'd lived the weight of them. Words that scared her because she'd never had to. From across the room, her mother finally spoke. You're clever, she said, voice brittle as glass. That's what makes you dangerous. You make people believe you belong here. David didn't turn. I don't need to make them believe anything. I just need to keep building what they can't destroy. The line landed harder than a shout. Even Emily's mother faltered. She gathered her purse, muttering something about standards, and left the room. The door clicked shut like the end of a warning. For a moment, the office belonged only to them. No family, no titles, no walls. Just two people caught between love and reputation. Emily sat on the edge of the desk, her voice small. Do you ever get tired? Of what? Fighting rooms like this. David looked down at his reflection in the glass. Dark suit against darker eyes, a shape the city couldn't define. Every day, he said. But I stopped fighting for rooms. I build my own now. She exhaled, a fragile sound between admiration and fear. You talk like it's easy. It's not. But it's necessary. He walked closer, lowering his voice. You said you wanted to know what real love feels like. This is it. It's not flowers and quiet dinners. It's the moment you realize love doesn't come with approval. It comes with proof. Her eyes softened, the tears she'd been holding finally visible under the sterile light. Then let me prove it too, she whispered. David studied her, then nodded once. Then you'll need to stand when it counts. Not just when it's easy. A silence followed, heavy, almost sacred. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of an elevator door closing broke it. Through the glass, Emily's father was pacing in his office, phone pressed to his ear. His reflection loomed behind them like a ghost of legacy, powerful, furious, afraid. David glanced at it, then back to her. He's already calling someone, let him. The truth doesn't need a lawyer. Emily turned to face the window again. The skyline reflected their silhouettes. Two figures standing against a city built on old names and quiet prejudice. And somewhere between the light and the glass, she saw it clearly for the first time. He wasn't the man they feared. He was the mirror that showed them who they really were. Richard's voice thundered through the hallway before his door even opened. I don't want that man in my building again. The assistants outside froze. No one breathed. Behind the glass, Emily and David stood still. Two shadows caught in the reflection of a man who thought he still controlled the room. The door swung open. Richard stepped out, phone still in hand, fury held together only by money and pride. Do you know what this looks like, Emily? You standing beside him? Emily's voice shook but didn't break. Yes, Dad, it looks like love. Love? His laugh was sharp, hollow. You think love can erase a headline? A family name. He turned to David. And you. I don't know what game you're playing, but I built this company from nothing. You won't buy your way into my family. David met his stare. Then maybe you built the wrong kind of company. A single sentence and calm, precise, lethal. The room seemed to tilt. Emily's heart pounded. Her father stepped forward, pointing a finger inches from David's chest. Don't you? But David didn't move. He didn't even blink. You're pointing at the wrong man, Richard. I'm not the one afraid of losing control. The hallway had filled with quiet witnesses now. Assistants pretending to type, interns pretending not to listen. Their screens reflected the argument, flickering like silent judgment. Richard caught the stares. Everyone back to work, he barked, voice breaking. No one moved. David turned to Emily. This isn't the place. But she didn't step back. If we leave now, we prove them right. Her words stopped him. He looked at her, really looked. The defiance trembling inside her, fragile but brave. It reminded him of himself years ago, standing in a similar hallway, being told he didn't belong. He drew a slow breath. All right, Richard frowned. All right, what? David straightened his jacket, the movement deliberate, unhurried. All right, let's make this official. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number. The line clicked. Rachel, he said quietly. Send the updated ownership file to Carter Holdings Group, under the Wallace account. Emily's father froze. What are you doing? David's tone never changed. Transferring oversight. You'll want to check your email. Richard's phone buzzed almost immediately. He glanced down, his own name under minority shareholder. His jaw tightened, color draining from his face. You can't. I can, David said simply. And I did. Because before this meeting, I bought the majority of your partner's shares, the same ones your board has been trying to reacquire for months. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It screamed. Emily stepped closer to him, both terrified and awed. You didn't. I did, he said softly. Because I don't fight for permission. I fight for peace. Her father's lips trembled, searching for a word strong enough to hold his anger, but none came. The only sound left was the faint ping of another email. Confirmation of transfer. Behind them, the staff whispered. One of them, a young woman named Clara, whispered, He owns us? Another nodded, eyes wide. All of it. David turned to Richard one last time. You wanted to know what game I'm playing? It's called accountability. And you just lost your first round. He took Emily's hand, gently but firmly, and started toward the elevator. The hallway parted like water. No one stopped them. No one could. Just before the doors closed, David looked back. You said you built this from nothing, he said. So did I. The only difference is I didn't forget where I came from. The elevator doors slid shut. The reflection of Richard's fury fractured across the steel surface. In the quiet that followed, the entire floor felt smaller. Downstairs, the city waited, unaware that somewhere above, a legacy had just shifted hands. The elevator doors opened to the building's private lobby. All glass, chrome and silence polished into perfection. David stepped out first, hand still linked with Emily's. Outside, rain had begun to fall, painting the city in streaks of silver. The storm wasn't loud yet. It was patient and the kind that builds before it breaks. Emily exhaled, her shoulders shaking as the elevator doors shut behind them. You just bought my father's company. David looked at her, voice steady. No, I bought his control. There's a difference. She turned, searching his face for the man she'd met months ago. The quiet CEO who hated headlines, who preferred late-night strategy calls and rooftop dinners to public attention. Now he looked like someone else, someone dangerous, deliberate, powerful. Was this your plan all along? She whispered. David didn't answer right away. He walked toward the wide window overlooking the city. Lightning flashed across the skyline. In its reflection, his silhouette looked less like a man and more like a reckoning. When I first met you, he said softly, your father told me at that dinner that partnerships were about power, not people. I didn't argue. I just made a note. Emily's throat tightened. You wanted to prove him wrong. He shook his head. No, I wanted to prove him small. The rain outside hit harder now, sharp against the glass like applause from ghosts. Emily crossed her arms, pacing. You think this is justice? You humiliated him. David turned, his gaze calm but cold. No, Emily, I exposed him. There's a difference. Justice is quiet until it's undeniable. She stepped closer. He's still my father. And he's still a man who would have thrown me out of his office for existing. His tone didn't rise, but the truth in it cut clean. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two sides of the same storm. Then her phone buzzed. A message. From her mother. Don't come home tonight. The words froze her. David saw the screen but didn't reach for it. He simply said, then stay here. Here? She asked, half disbelieving. He nodded. Upstairs. My floor. I can't. You can. Because you're not running from them. You're standing with me. She looked at him, tears threatening but not falling. You really think love can survive this? He stepped closer, inches between them. His voice softened. Love doesn't survive storms, Emily. It builds them, and then it walks through dry. Outside, thunder cracked. The lights flickered once, as if the building itself was listening. David's phone vibrated again, Rachel, his assistant. He answered quietly. Yes, Rachel's voice came through crisp. News outlets are picking up the transfer. Headlines in 30 minutes. I've also received an inquiry from Wallace Sr. Let him stew, David replied. We don't defend the truth. We let it echo. Emily leaned against the glass, watching the city blur. You've thought about this for a long time. I've lived this for a long time, he corrected. Every meeting where my name came before my face. Every deal where my competence was questioned but my profits weren't. Every time I smiled when I wanted to fight. She turned to him, her voice trembling. And now? He walked toward her, slow and certain. Now I don't smile. I stand. The lightning outside flared again, a burst of white across the glass. For a brief moment, both their reflections merged into one. Two figures against a skyline that had never been built for them to share. David whispered, almost to himself. They tried to shut a door I built. Emily looked at him, the stormlight dancing in her eyes. And what happens when the storm ends? He smiled faintly. It doesn't, it just changes direction. The city woke restless. Headlines burned across every screen before sunrise. Tech CEO overtakes Wallace conglomerate in overnight deal. Some called it genius. Others called it revenge. But none of them knew the truth behind the photograph now circulating online. David Carter walking out of the Wallace Tower, hand in hand with Emily Wallace under the rain. In her family's estate, The silence was worse than the noise. Richard had spent the entire night on the phone, trying to contain a story that refused to shrink. His wife sat in the breakfast room, coffee untouched, eyes red from a sleepless rage. "They're mocking us," she muttered. "Our friends, the press, everyone." Richard didn't look up. "It'll pass." It won't. Not until she ends it. Up in David's penthouse, the morning light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. Cold, clean, exposing everything. Emily stood by the kitchen counter, wrapped in his oversized shirt, scrolling through her phone. Notifications flooded her screen. Text from friends, reporters, even distant relatives pretending concern. She set it down, defeated. "They've turned us into a story." David, standing across the room, buttoned his shirt cuff with deliberate calm. "They've turned themselves into an audience." She gave a small, tired laugh. "You always sound like you've rehearsed for war." He met her gaze. "That's because every room like last night was one." The kettle clicked. Steam curled between them, softening the space. Emily finally asked what she'd been holding back since dawn. "Did you plan all of this? Before you met me?" David paused. The question hung heavy. "I planned to grow," he said quietly. "I didn't plan you." Her heart twisted. It wasn't a romantic answer. It was honest, which somehow hurt more. She walked to the window, watching the city move. Cars, people, lives. All of them unaware of how one night had redrawn a family's map of power. "Do you ever wish you'd stayed invisible?" she asked. He joined her, their reflections aligned in the glass again. Invisibility never saved anyone. It just delayed their voice. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city noise hummed below, distant but alive. Then David's phone rang, in a number he recognized. He answered, voice level. "Richard." Emily froze. Her father's voice came through low and deliberate. "You've made your point. You've embarrassed my family. Now it's time to undo it." David leaned against the counter. "Undo what? Ownership? Dignity? You think this makes you powerful?" Richard spat. "Power isn't about headlines." "No," David said. "It's about legacy. That's why you're calling me." Silence. The kind that means someone's losing ground. Finally, Richard said, "My daughter deserves better than being used for leverage." David's jaw tightened. "If you believe that, then stop treating her like one." He ended the call before Richard could respond. The phone vibrated again seconds later. He ignored it. Emily stared at him. "What did he say?" "Nothing new," he replied. "Men like him always mistake consequence for cruelty." She moved closer, her voice trembling. "He'll never forgive you." David smiled faintly. "He doesn't have to." She studied him for a long moment, then whispered, "You scare me sometimes." "I scare myself too," he admitted. "But fear's just clarity. It tells us what's worth standing for." Outside, the sun broke through a slit in the cloud, a fragile beam cutting through gray. Emily stepped into it, light warming her face. She looked back at him. "Then maybe it's time I stood too." He met her eyes, the faintest nod. "Then stand with me, not behind, not beside, with." The moment hung, silent and electric. Somewhere a news alert chimed again, but neither turned to look. For the first time since the storm began, they weren't running, explaining, or defending. They were just there, two people, one truth, and a world finally forced to watch. By noon, the rain had stopped, but the tension hadn't. A quiet settled over the city, the kind that comes after headlines and before consequences. David's penthouse was still, save for the low hum of the news on mute. A headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Wallace family declines comment on CEO takeover." Emily watched the footage, her father's office building surrounded by cameras. Reporters shouting into microphones. Her reflection looked back at her from the glass window, pale, tired, older than yesterday. Then came the buzz of the intercom. David turned from his laptop. "Who is it?" The doorman's voice crackled through. "A visitor, sir, Mr. Wallace." Emily froze. David didn't. He simply said, "Send him up, David." She whispered, "Don't." He looked at her, calm, almost gentle. "He came here because he lost control in his space. Let him enter mine." The elevator ride must have felt like a descent for Richard Wallace. When the doors opened, he stepped into a world he didn't understand. Clean lines, muted tones. Walls covered not with family portraits but with framed patents, awards, and headlines that didn't bear his name. David stood by the window, Sunlight behind him, hands clasped loosely. Richard's voice carried his usual authority, but beneath it was something else, a fracture. So this is how you celebrate? Taking what isn't yours? David didn't move. Everything in this room is earned, including your respect, though I'm still waiting on that. Richard scoffed. You think money makes you equal to me? David finally turned. No, integrity does. And you traded yours for appearances a long time ago. The silence that followed was a duel. Two men, same ambition, different wars. Emily stepped between them. Dad, stop, please. He looked at her, the daughter who had once been his perfect reflection. You're really choosing him? I'm choosing truth, she said quietly. Richard's face hardened. Truth doesn't buy forgiveness. David's tone stayed low, controlled. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to see what your pride cost you. Richard laughed bitterly. You think I lost? You just became the villain in your own success story. David took a slow breath. Maybe, but at least my story's mine. He walked past him toward the bar, poured a glass of water, and set it down without drinking. You built walls to keep people like me out. I build doors. One of us will still be standing when the world changes again. Emily whispered, Dad, please. But Richard cut her off, voice trembling now. He'll ruin you, Emily. The world doesn't forgive this kind of love. David's eyes softened, and he spoke not to Richard but to her. The world doesn't forgive what it doesn't understand. That's why we teach it. Richard turned toward the door, defeated but unwilling to show it. You think you've won today, Carter. But power shifts fast. So does loyalty. David nodded slightly. That's why I build mine on truth. The elevator doors opened again, reflecting the skyline in silver. Richard hesitated, then stepped in without looking back. The doors closed, quietly, like a chapter ending itself. Emily stood still, trembling. He's never walked away from me before. David approached, stopping just close enough for her to feel his calm. Then maybe this time he heard you. She looked up at him, tears threatening. Do you think he'll ever forgive us? David glanced at the skyline, where the storm clouds were breaking apart. Forgiveness is a privilege. Understanding is power. I'll take the second. He reached for her hand, not to comfort but to anchor. Outside, sunlight broke through fully now, flooding the glass, spilling over both of them. The city kept moving below, but up here, something had shifted. For the first time, it wasn't just a fight for love. It was a reckoning between generations, between what was inherited and what was earned. By the next morning, the fight had moved beyond family. It was business now, public, official, and televised. The Wallace conglomerate's emergency board meeting filled the top floor of their headquarters. Cameras weren't allowed, but leaks were inevitable. The building itself felt tense, like it was holding its breath. At the center of the table sat Richard Wallace, pale and cold, trying to hold what was left of his empire together. And across from him, David Carter, calm, crisp suit, silent power. Emily sat beside him, her presence both scandal and statement. Every executive in the room whispered when they thought no one was listening. The air carried judgment, the kind that pretends to be professionalism. The chairman, a gray-haired man with a trembling voice, began. We're here to address the recent acquisition conflict, David interrupted, polite but firm. There's no conflict. The transfer is complete. This meeting is to discuss continuity, not control. All heads turned. The man continued nervously. Mr. Carter, with all due respect, the Wallace family retains a seat, David said smoothly. Just not the throne. A ripple ran through the room. Richard leaned forward, hands gripping the table. You think you can come in here and rewrite decades of structure overnight? David met his gaze without blinking. No, I think your structure rewrote itself the moment it depended on me. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was its own language. Richard turned toward the others, forcing composure. We've built this company on legacy, not hostility. If this man wants a partnership, he'll find none until he learns humility. David stood. The movement alone drew every eye. He walked to the window at the end of the room, the same view Richard once used to intimidate his rivals. The city stretched below, indifferent and infinite. When I was 16, David began, voice steady. I used to stand outside buildings like this, watching men like you walk in. I thought power meant access. Now I know, power means you never need permission again. He turned, gaze sweeping the room. You built your legacy on names. I'm building mine on proof, and in business, proof always wins. Emily's eyes followed him, pride flickering behind the fear. He placed a folder on the table. Inside are the audit reports your board ignored for 2 years. Misused funds, shadow accounts, employee terminations for speaking out. I didn't buy this company for revenge. I bought it to stop that. The folder slid across the table toward Richard. The older man didn't touch it. Instead, he whispered, "You think exposing us makes you righteous?" David's voice softened. "No, it makes me responsible." A hush fell. Every board member exchanged glances, calculating. The tide had shifted, not with shouting, but with composure. Emily spoke up then, her voice small but steady. "This isn't about family anymore. It's about accountability. If we pretend this isn't real, we lose everything worth protecting." Richard looked at her, the daughter who once echoed his every word now standing beside the man who dismantled his illusion. He said nothing, just lowered his gaze. The chairman cleared his throat. "The board will reconvene to review these documents. In the meantime, Mr. Carter, you'll act as interim CEO until further notice." David nodded once. "That'll do." He gathered his things, calm as if nothing monumental had just happened. As he walked past Richard, he paused. "I didn't take your empire, Richard. You left it undefended." He moved toward the door, Emily following quietly. The room remained still, the weight of his words hanging in the air like dust that refused to settle. Outside, in the hallway lined with portraits of the Wallace lineage, Emily stopped. Her hand brushed over the gold frame of her grandfather's photo. David glanced at her, she whispered, "My family used to build stories about power. You just turned it into truth." David looked back at the door they had just left. "Truth doesn't need to win. It just needs to stay standing." They walked on, down the long corridor of history, leaving silence where legacy used to speak. The story broke faster than the board could contain it. By the end of the day, every major outlet had a headline. Black CEO exposes corruption inside Wallace conglomerate. Love, power and justice, the couple that shook the city. Screens flashed with his face. Calm, composed, the man who had turned silence into strategy. But the comments were louder than the news. Some called him a hero. Others called him a thief. And somewhere between praise and prejudice, the world decided who they wanted him to be. In the penthouse, Emily scrolled through the chaos. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from colleagues, old friends, even journalists offering sympathetic interviews. David, meanwhile, sat at his desk, typing, unbothered. "You're trending everywhere," she said quietly. "I know. You don't seem happy about it. I'm not here to be famous. I'm here to finish what your father started, and forgot." She studied him for a long moment. "You really think people will understand that?" He stopped typing, turned to her. "I don't need them to understand. I need them to watch." The knock came then, sharp, deliberate. Emily went pale. "Who?" Before she could finish, the door opened. Her mother. The room froze. She looked different now. Smaller, tired, a woman whose world had cracked in front of the cameras. "David," she said softly, "we need to talk." He stood but didn't move closer. "You came all this way to threaten me again?" Her eyes flicked to Emily. "No, to ask for my daughter back." Emily's breath caught. "Mom," her mother stepped forward, voice trembling. "You've made your point. You've humiliated us, destroyed your father's reputation." David cut in quietly. "I didn't destroy him. The truth did." She turned on him, desperate. "You don't understand the kind of people we deal with. This isn't just a scandal, it's blood in the water. They'll come for you next." He took a slow step forward. "Let them. I don't hide behind legacy." Her mother's eyes shone, and not anger now, but fear. "You're too proud to see what pride costs. You think you've won, but power always demands payment." Emily moved between them. "Mom, stop." But her mother grabbed her arm, pleading. "He's not like us, Emily. He'll never be accepted. You'll spend your life fighting battles that aren't yours." Emily looked at her, tears finally falling. "They became mine the moment you made them about color." The room went still again. David didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence belonged to her now. Her mother looked from one to the other, something breaking behind her eyes. "You think love can fix centuries of prejudice?" Emily answered softly. "No. but it can stop me from repeating it." Her mother's lips trembled. She stepped back, suddenly looking older. "You sound just like him." David tilted his head. "Then maybe she's learning." There was nothing left to say. The older woman turned and left, her reflection disappearing in the mirrored walls like a ghost retreating into history. Emily stood still, breathing hard, the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders. David reached for her hand. "You did what I couldn't," he said quietly. "You spoke to the wound." She looked up at him, eyes red. "It doesn't feel like winning." "It never does," he replied. "Until the silence feels different." Outside, the city pulsed, not with noise, but with awareness. Social feeds filled with clips from last night's meeting, voices debating, stories rewriting themselves in real time. David turned off the screens, letting the room fall into peace. "They'll say what they want," he murmured. "Let them. The world needs noise before it learns to listen." Emily leaned against him, exhausted. "And what do we do now?" He looked toward the skyline, light breaking through again, slow and steady. "Now," he said, "we build something that doesn't need to shout." The camera pulled back. Two figures against a city that once doubted them, standing quiet in their truth. 3 days later, David and Emily sat across from each other at a long oak table, not in a boardroom this time, but in a quiet private dining hall reserved for executives. The invitation had come from Richard himself. No cameras, no aides, no assistants, just family and consequence. Emily had hesitated when she read the message. David hadn't. "He's not asking to talk," he said. "He's asking to recover." Now the air between them was thick with unspoken history. A waiter poured wine and vanished. Only the clink of glass remained. Richard entered a minute later. No tie, no entourage. Just the look of a man who'd lost control and hated that he had. He didn't sit right away. He looked at David first. "You always knew how to turn silence into power." David met his gaze evenly. "You always mistook silence for weakness." Richard finally sat. "I didn't come here to argue." "Then why are we here?" David asked. Richard looked at Emily. "Because I don't want my daughter to hate me." Emily's breath caught. "It's not hate," she said softly. "It's disappointment." That landed harder than any accusation. Richard's shoulders sank slightly. "I raised you to be strong, not rebellious." She shook her head. "You raised me to be afraid of being wrong." "That's not the same." The waiter refilled their glasses and disappeared again. For a long moment no one spoke. The world outside moved on. Cars, city lights, chatter. But inside this room, time held still. Richard broke the silence. "You think love will protect you, Emily? From the world? From people who look at you and see scandal instead of strength?" Emily looked up steady. "No, love doesn't protect me from the world. It reminds me not to become it." Richard turned to David, almost smirking. "And do you really believe this ends well for you?" "For her?" David leaned forward, elbows on the table, tone measured. "I don't believe in endings. I believe in consequences. And right now you're deciding whether yours will be redemption or regret." Richard's jaw tightened. "You think you have me cornered?" "No," David said. "I think you have a chance to evolve. And that scares you more than losing power ever did." That silence again, heavier now, sharper. Finally, Richard let out a breath. "You sound like me when I was your age." David nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why we fight the same battles differently." The older man looked down at his wine, swirling it once. "You know, I used to believe legacy was a fortress. Now I see it's a mirror." Emily's voice softened. "And what do you see in it?" Richard glanced between them, his tone stripped of arrogance. "The parts of me I tried to bury. The fear of being replaced by someone better." David didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply said, "You're not being replaced, Richard. You're being reminded." The words lingered, not triumphant, but true. Outside, the rain had started again. Not violent this time, just steady. The sound of it against the windows filled the pauses between breaths. Richard looked at his daughter again. "You love him," she nodded. "Completely. And you trust him?" "With everything." He studied David, then nodded once. "Then prove I was wrong about you." David didn't answer with words. He stood, extended a hand across the table. Richard hesitated, then took it. The handshake of two men who'd finally stopped fighting gravity. When their hands parted, Something unspoken shifted in the room. Not forgiveness yet, but the permission to start over. Emily exhaled, tears welling but not falling. "Is this peace?" David turned to her, voice quiet. "No, this is the beginning of it." The waiter returned, unaware of the history that had just changed. He placed 3 plates on the table. Steam rose, soft and fleeting, like the last breath of a storm that finally ran out of reasons to rage. For the first time in days, no one spoke. They just ate. Not as enemies, not as legends, just people, finally painfully real. By the end of that week, peace had a shape, uneasy, fragile, but real. The media storm had begun to fade, replaced by new scandals, new distractions. Yet inside the walls of the Wallace Carter offices, something unfamiliar had taken root. Calm. David arrived early that morning, before the board, before the noise. The skyline outside still glowed faintly with dawn. He stood by the glass, hands in pockets, watching the city he'd once thought would never make room for a man like him. Now it reflected him back. Equal parts ambition and consequence. The door opened behind him. "Still avoiding the spotlight?" A voice teased gently. Emily. She wore black, elegant and unassuming, hair pulled back, eyes bright with something new. Resolve. "Not avoiding," he said. "Just remembering who I am when it's quiet." She walked closer. "You've been quiet all week. I've been listening." "To what?" "The world," he said simply. "And how it changes when you stop shouting." She smiled faintly. "That almost sounds like peace." He turned, finally facing her. "Almost." They stood close now, not as rebels, not as fugitives of a family's reputation, but as 2 people who had outlasted the noise. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carter," the receptionist's voice came through. "Mr. Wallace is here to see you." David hesitated, just a heartbeat. Then, "Send him in." When Richard entered, he carried no briefcase, no pride, just an envelope. Emily straightened. "Dad." He nodded to her, then turned to David. "I came to finish what we started." David gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Then sit." Richard didn't. He placed the envelope on the desk instead. "I'm stepping down. The board voted this morning. They want you to lead permanently." Emily blinked. "What? That's unexpected?" Richard finished. "Not really. The numbers don't lie. The company's stock rose 15% since you took over. Investors love a man who doesn't flinch." David looked at the envelope, then back at him. "And what about you? You just walk away?" Richard exhaled. "No, I'm taking a smaller role. Advisory. Less power, more perspective." There was something humble in his tone, something human. "I fought you because I saw myself in you," he admitted. "The hunger, the pride, the need to be right even when you were just surviving. I thought I was protecting my name. I was really protecting my fear." David studied him quietly. "And now?" "Now I'm protecting my daughter," Richard said simply. "And the man she chose." The room went still. Emily's hand trembled against her side. Richard continued. "There's one condition. You don't just rebuild this company. You redefine it. You make it something neither of us could on our own." David leaned back. "That's the only thing I've ever wanted." Richard nodded, then extended his hand. "Then make it worth her name, too." They shook, not out of victory, but out of understanding. When Richard left, the door closed softly behind him. For the first time, David allowed himself to breathe. Emily watched him. "You did it," she whispered. "You made peace without losing yourself." He looked at her, eyes warm but sharp. "No, we did. And peace isn't a finish line, Emily. It's a daily negotiation." She smiled faintly. "That sounds exhausting." "It's the only kind worth fighting for." They stood by the window again, the place where this story had first begun, when everything was noise and doubt. Now the city moved below them, unaware of the quiet revolution that had taken place in one office. Emily reached for his hand. "You know what's crazy?" "What?" "After everything, I'm not afraid anymore." David looked out at the horizon, the morning sun cutting through the clouds. "That's because truth doesn't leave room for fear," he said. "It replaces it." Outside, light spilled across the skyline, gold over steel, calm after storm. In its reflection, they stood together. Not as scandal, not as defiance, but as proof. 3 months later, the city had stopped whispering. Scandal had turned into myth, and myth had turned into momentum. Where the headlines once screamed betrayal and race, they now spoke of innovation. Carter Wallace Group unveils new equity initiative, rebuilding trust from the inside out. The press conference was set inside the same tower where everything began. The same marble floors, same glass walls, but a different kind of tension now. Not fear, expectation. Cameras lined the back of the room, lights humming softly. Rows of journalists waited, pens poised, ready to write the next chapter of a story they once misread. Emily stood by the curtain, notes trembling slightly in her hands. "Do I look like I belong here?" she asked, half joking. David turned to her, fixing her mic. "You don't need to look like it," he said. "You already built the part they can't fake. Courage." She smiled nervously. "You always say the right thing." "No," he corrected. "I just say what's true." When they stepped on stage together, the flash of cameras filled the room. A murmur rippled. They were seeing not the forbidden couple, but two leaders sharing one spotlight. David spoke first. 3 months ago, this company was a headline about division. Today, it's a blueprint for change. Because we learned that equity isn't a slogan, it's a system. One that needs rebuilding every day. The crowd leaned in. He paused, scanning the room. "Some people said I took this company out of anger. They were wrong. I took it out of faith. Faith that we can turn confrontation into collaboration. Faith that transparency isn't weakness. And faith that power, when shared, becomes purpose." Applause broke, hesitant at first, then louder. Emily stepped forward next. "My name is Emily Wallace," she began, steady now. "And for most of my life, that name meant privilege. It meant rooms that opened for me even when I didn't deserve it. But love and truth taught me that open doors mean nothing if others have to stay outside." Her voice caught slightly, but she didn't stop. "So today, this company begins something new. We're creating a fund to support minority-owned startups to make sure opportunity doesn't depend on a last name." The room erupted. Flashbulbs went off like stars. From the front row, Richard watched quietly, pride flickering across his face. Reluctant, but real. His wife sat beside him, hands clasped, eyes glistening with the weight of understanding she'd once resisted. David took the mic again. "We're not perfect," he said simply. "But perfection isn't the point. Progress is. And progress begins the moment you stop defending the past and start designing the future." Applause again, this time sustained, not performative but moved. As the conference ended, reporters crowded the stage, eager for statements. David gave them a brief smile and walked Emily off stage. Behind the curtain, she turned to him. "Do you realize what just happened?" He nodded slowly. "We turned a scandal into structure." She laughed softly, the sound lighter than it had been in months. "And my father didn't interrupt once," David grinned. "That might be the biggest miracle." Richard approached then, slower, thoughtful. He extended a hand to David. "You did what I couldn't," he said quietly. "You made people listen without raising your voice." David shook his hand firmly. "That's because you already taught them how to hear power. I just changed the tone." For a moment, all three stood there. Generations, history's corrections, and bound not by blood, but by what they'd survived. As the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Emily whispered, "Do you think they'll ever stop seeing color before character?" David looked out toward the city skyline through the open doors, golden light spilling in. "Maybe not," he said, "but today they saw both, and that's a start." Outside, the sun dipped low, scattering light across the glass towers that once held their silence. Inside, the echo of applause lingered, not for spectacle, but for shift. Because this wasn't about victory anymore. It was about visibility, and for the first time that was enough. Night settled over the city, soft and forgiving. The streets below still glowed with the after-image of the press conference. Reporters packing up, flashes fading, the world slowly returning to motion. But high above, in the glass-walled office where everything began, David stayed behind. The building was silent now. No audience. No cameras. Just him, the hum of the city, and the reflection of a man who had spent his whole life proving that dignity could be louder than hate. Emily entered quietly, heels clicking against the marble. "You're still here," she said. He smiled without turning. "I like this part of the night. When the noise ends and all that's left is the truth." She came to stand beside him, following his gaze across the skyline. What do you see? He took a breath. I see a city that tried to make me earn permission. And I see a man who finally stopped asking for it. She leaned into him. And what do you feel? He turned slightly, meeting her eyes. Grateful, tired, alive. They both laughed, and softly, like exhaling years of tension. Behind them, the new company logo gleamed on the wall. Carter Wallace Group, building forward. Emily traced the edge of his sleeve. Do you ever think about how it all started? The day in that boardroom? My mother yelling, you standing there like the world couldn't move you. I remember, he said quietly. I remember thinking, if I walk out now, they win. And if I stay, I change the story, she smiled. You did more than change it. You rewrote it. He looked back at the city, thoughtful. Then maybe it's your turn now. My turn? You're the next voice, he said. People listen to you differently. They don't expect defiance from you. They expect grace. Use it. She hesitated, then nodded. I will. A beat of silence. The kind that feels like peace, not tension. Then the elevator chimed. Richard stepped out, older, softer, holding 2 cups of coffee. I thought I'd find you both here. Emily blinked. Dad, it's midnight. I know, he said, setting the cups down. But I was thinking, legacy shouldn't be a cage. It should be a gift, David studied him. And what kind of gift are we talking about? Richard smiled faintly. The kind that keeps growing after we're gone. You two made something today. Something I couldn't have, not in my time. Don't stop with speeches. Build schools. Fund ideas. Leave the next generation fewer excuses. Emily's eyes glistened. You really mean that? He nodded. It took me 50 years to understand that control isn't power. Influence is, and you both have more of it than you realize. David extended his hand again. No rivalry this time, just respect. Then let's make it count. Richard clasped it firmly. That's all I ever wanted. They stood together by the window. 3 silhouettes framed by the city's lights. Past and future sharing one horizon. Outside, a billboard flashed with a new campaign. Equality isn't charity. It's infrastructure. Below the slogan, the Carter Wallace logo glowed against the night. Emily smiled softly. Do you ever think they'll stop doubting us? David shook his head. No, but maybe that's the point. Because doubt keeps us honest. And honesty keeps us free. Richard chuckled quietly. You sound like a man writing his own eulogy. David grinned. No, just his preface. They laughed. Not the polite laughter of meetings or appearances, but something real, deep, earned. The camera drifted toward the window. The 3 figures became silhouettes against a skyline reborn. The city that once measured worth by color now reflected gold on every surface. Imperfect but trying. Voiceover. David's, calm and steady. Power doesn't change who you are. It reveals who stayed silent when you weren't supposed to speak. And legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build loud enough for the world to remember. The music swells. Soft piano over the hum of the city. Fade to black. Text on screen. Justice doesn't need noise, only truth.